So we mentioned before about me inflating figures, and I said two businesses or two startups. I guess it's not fair to call Kodo a startup anymore necessarily. It's a bit more of an established business, but you're still involved in Kodo today. It's still something you actively...
That's a good point. So there's 12 full-time staff in Kodo now. It's a constant struggle to hire good staff and keep them with the competitiveness of the industry, but the ones we've got at the moment are 12 awesome guys, and we're very lucky to have within that a general manager now that we got lucky with James. We've known James personally for quite a long time, and he was a good fit that looks after and basically runs our business. It's his business, so we call it pretty much. But Josh and I are just directors of the company, and then we're his sounding board and give him direction when he needs. But he's fantastic. So we're very fortunate to be able to step out of the day-to-day running of that business and leave it to him to deal with all the fun and games of it. We didn't think that was very sort of unique, but there's not an actual huge amount of IT companies around that directors actually do step out of their business. So we found that out not long ago actually, and we're quite humbled by that. So it's not common when you've got quite tight margins and the industry is pretty competitive where you can take a small wage and not actually work in the business day to day. So
great passive income though, and an outcome from a business that's still operating today.
Yeah. And it has its own challenges of where it's going and constantly evolving and adapting. And that's something that we're working on all the time of trying to keep ahead of, and cybersecurity, and obviously net zero is one thing. We're starting with sustainability to try and just be a better business going forward. Who knows what's going to hold for Kodo, but hopefully it'll be good things. I did put something in there roughly about money. I can't remember, and customers.
So I've got here 121 managed customers, 1,100 ad hoc base.
Yep.
Average around 220 to 250 per month turnover. 220 to 250,000, sorry. Average turnover, and a year-on-year increase of 7 to 20%.
Yeah, that's pretty consistent.
So it's still on a growth trajectory for the business.
And it's a problem trying to grow with that. You think it would be easy, but it's actually a tricky thing. We don't advertise in that business really at all, and it just is organic growth, and it's a challenge. In the organic growth, we'll probably talk about more with the next story, that it can derail your business very quickly. Luckily, Kodo we can sort of control, but there have been points over the last couple of years of where service has declined below a point of where we wanted it because we didn't have the staff capacity. So you can't turn people away, but you can't obviously get bad at what you're doing either. So, and this is the next journey. So I guess we're probably about 2015, when was that? 2014, I think. So we're in business, must have been a couple of years nearly. That can't be right. Yeah, it probably is a year. It all happened so quickly. Honestly, it's a blur. So this, I guess at the point in time, Beam Internet or Beam Barossa, whoever's heard of that, it's now Swoop. Probably started with us servicing IT customers and going, the NBN is just horrendous. And it was our main downfall in servicing IT customers, especially with the cloud transition and cloud computing software, that we just couldn't transition people, and it was our major vein. Every billing overrun we had, or anything that we had to basically explain or apologise to customers, generally came back to dealing with a telecommunications provider. And we were like, oh, we kind of know radios, we kind of know how to do these things, and we've done a bit of telco, obviously working elsewhere. It was like, is a complementary customer base? Maybe it's time to launch a telco provider. So segue, the Beam Internet was born at that point, or Beam Barossa initially, and that's probably part of the story as well we can go into. But Beam was started, the initial goal was to get 300 customers, which is a pretty big thing in our Barossa area, and initially was basically just help the IT business and have synergies between the two. And the other thing that really kicked that off, not getting into politics, but monitored the government change. And when we changed government, we also quite heavily changed the strategy in NBN development. And when the government got elected, that was another trigger point that made us go, we knew that we knew I suppose the successor's plan was flawed in a lot of ways, and then we took advantage of that pretty much. So there's a few things that aligned.
So we've talked a little bit about Kodo Technologies and just on Beam, but what I'm interested in, I guess, picking out of that is the rationale for starting those has been because you saw, I think the first part was you just saw that there was a customer market. You're working in an industry, saw a customer market that was being ignored or not being catered to, perhaps, might be a more PC way of saying it.
Yeah.
So you established that there was a need out there, right? There's a customer base there that had a need. And in the second business that you started, Kodo, again, developed out of a frustration that, it wasn't necessarily your customers that saw the frustration. I think when we were talking, you said that you were having trouble yourselves getting access to internet. So it was another frustration that led to identifying a need in the market, yeah?
Yep.
The underpinning, can you just go through, because there'd be lots of things, you come across when you're working going, oh, is that a need, is that a need, is that a... What did you justify as being a need or to create that ideation?
I think we're going to talk about that more
later on.
There's more slides to come.
There are.
I better not talk for too long. I honestly don't think there was much thought in it at the time. There probably should have been more, but there's always a need and then there's a why. And the why was pretty clear to us as a business point of a continuity for, say, starting Beam. Like, it was an inconvenience to us and there was a market demand there that we knew existed. So the stars aligned. There was customers that were needing good internet with good customer service, and we were also needing that to service our IT customers better. So the why we did it was because obviously no one else was doing it. So we obviously analysed that from our experience in the area. We knew no one else was playing in that space. We couldn't tell if someone was going to start up next week in there. There were some close calls with people talking about stuff, but frankly, a lot of people talk about stuff and never do anything about it. That's probably nicely as I'll put it. I think it just felt obvious that we had a skill set there. We had some money in Kodo that funded Beam to start, and then it just... I basically split off entirely into Beam and Josh stayed in Kodo, and that's just how we manage things. And is that sort of answer? If anyone's got anything, just make notes at the end, I think. Or
we'll still have the Q&A side of it.
Yeah.
Great service, I noticed, was a part of one of the bits that you'd put in there.
Yeah.
And it's come up a little bit as well. So was there a lack in terms of service provision for other companies doing the same thing that you were doing, or you saw that as a point of difference?
Does anyone not like their internet provider 5 years ago here? That's the market intelligence right there. Like, it's getting better with the NBN now in a lot of cases, but I also think it's going to go back the other way in the future. But it's a different playing field now. Like, it was a time and a place, and that sort of goes to, I guess, an exit strategy, which we didn't actually have an exit strategy, but it drive the exit strategy in the end of that. We're feeling the landscape's changing, and that's what happens. So, then this happened. So from 300 customers went a bit out of control. We started installing at some stages 180 customers a month, like in the first year and a bit. So it just we underestimated the demand quite badly. And that was linked to not just giving a good connection and good speeds and good price. The service was probably the best, I think, the most important thing out of all of that. I think something that's reliable, but people valued the service the most out of it. And being service is, you ring up, my connection's down, can you help me fix it? Oh, I've got a new credit card, can you change this for me? I've got an Xbox, can you help me do a port forward for a game? Like, all these things that people get frustrated with, how do you make that easy? And that was our driver for a long time, was how to make that, I suppose, better than anyone else around. And the way that we did that was by keeping it all in-house and keeping NBN independent. As soon as we went and used NBN or another carrier, then we obviously were constrained by their service for fixing their parts of the network. So our network was owned and ran by us, so we could control and remediate or fix anything on that network anywhere at the timing that we wanted it. So that was a big thing of getting customer service good over the years, was very proactive in fixing things, communicating with customers really well, and all of that. The next thing that probably grew it was just word of mouth, advertising, all of the common things. You could probably ask more if you want, but the staff, everything was very good, like humbling. There's a lot of challenges in here, don't get me wrong, but to get to this point, we had a lot of good relationships with people. For example, at this point it became Beam Internet, so it was Beam Barossa before, and now it's Beam Internet because obviously we're not in the Barossa anymore. And that was like that. I think we changed the name after about a year and a half or something, from memory. I don't really remember actually, but we decided that we were breaching out and then we wanted to go into a new area. And this is a problem with being a regional business, is how do we install someone's connection in Hullett when our office is in Newry? How do we install a connection in Narracourt or at Flinders Chase when our office is in Newry? And that's a big, tricky thing to deal with. And in the end, we developed relationships and with people in those areas. So a key relationship with someone in the southeast Kangaroo Island and at Borough. And then we had varying relationships with them, but basically it was those relationships that forged our growth regionally, which was our passion, was to get internet to as many people that had crap internet. So
we had a chat before, and in that I was interested in, how does this start? Like, how do you go, yeah, I'm going to start a wireless internet company? Like, how do you? I don't know about you guys, but I just think that's beyond me. Like, just so far beyond me. I'm thinking big, steel structures with those, 3, 4G little white bar things that you see placed on them. I'm thinking, how do you do that from, being an IT service provider? So I asked the question, what did you start with? And your answer was two towers, right? So you just worked out where to put 2 towers somewhere in the Barossa. And how tall? What did they cost? I remember you mentioning
lots of things. And a disclaimer: being a telco like this is not a telco like you think of Telstra, which has got massive towers everywhere. That's a different business ploy that maybe I'll segue. You make sure I answer your question after. But to be fast moving and to be nimble and to get coverage where you need, waiting on a land acquisition to build a 30-metre tower and go through development approvals and all this stuff is just out of the realm of how you do it. So pretty much in the end, we're like, how can we get more coverage faster, cheaper? And that basically methodology is we build lots more small towers and we stay under development approval regulations. We work with landowners, and at our peak time, we're building a tower every week nearly, all over the place. So pretty much it was, and this is probably a thing we learned around business, it's not to work around rules and regulations, it's just how to find your business's synergy to sort of work with that. So they're like 10 metres, you need to get a DA, development approval, it's going to take you months and months. If you go 9.9 metres, technically you can get away with pretty much in most of our area. So do we really need an extra 100 millimetres to get our project done? No. So they came to that. So imagine just lots of little towers, lots of solar powered sites, lots of main sites, all of these things. And the first ones came being a crazy nerdy radio operator. I had a stash of towers actually at home, as everyone does. So one of our towers was from the backyard stash, which was only about 10 metres tall, and that went on a really prominent hill that took us a long time to get access to, and that's a tricky thing of working with people, but we got there. And the other tower we actually bought for $400 from sporting club down at Maipalonga Sporting Club. They were taking down a light mast and we repurposed it. So we recovered lots of towers from places and repurposed them into our business. So most of our towers...
For those first couple then, it was relatively cheap, relatively simple, not what I had envisaged in my mind. Right? Yeah.
I think we spent about $35,000 very initially, but that soon then went out of control with obviously costings, but yeah, that's what we paid in hardware initially. And then we had to have a feeder site, so we had to get fibre optic. Obviously we have to get connection from somewhere. So we pulled that from Roseworthy, which is the closest, most practical place we could find fibre optic that someone would actually build it, because people are just not very proactive in selling you things in telco land. So we got that, and that site was going through a change of ownership. So many things were challenges at the start. It took us probably 4 or 5 months to get that site across the line, to get the owner to actually put his signature on a piece of paper. So there's not been easy getting going, but once we got going, it was like, hooray, now we're off. So yeah. After that, some towers we built in the end cost $180,000 and some were costing $5,000. So that's the sort of scale you get the difference of there.
So it wasn't cheap necessarily, 35 grand to get started with the first two towers, but that's much cheaper than I would have thought to get into a wireless internet business. Yeah.
Well, considering just for probably a fact in the end, I'm just thinking how much we would have spent full growth phase. Like we were spending about $60,000 a month on just hardware growth, plus probably about financing $600,000 a year on top of that. So we financed that out of our organics, and then $600,000 in debt facility for about 4 years we financed, so you can get a bit of a picture.
That was to meet the growth demand that has been,
Yep. Lifestyle would have been a different story, but it wasn't a lifestyle. So that's that. Yes.
I touched on this before, but why? What's your thinking in terms of these, the differences between these two?
Yeah. I can probably relay back. I currently work for the company that bought Beam 2 days a week now, so I'm an employee right at the moment, and probably my early frustrations are now relieved to a point now, and I think it was always originally, I think everyone's probably got it, especially being a bit younger, probably a little bit stubborn in my thought process of this is, I can see that's wrong, let's just do something about it and move on, but not everyone's wired to think like that would change, and they don't action change that quickly. So definitely a big thing about seeing something that needs to be done and just doing it, GSD methodology we called it, is a big thing that we really, I suppose, was a big driver for us. So probably the biggest thing, take away the flexibility, although there is no flexibility when you have your own business if you want the real crux of it. Definitely just that seeing something and actually doing something about it, not talking about it, is I think one of the best things about it from a positive point of view. And you can take it where you want it. You can hopefully deal with the people that you want. You can deal with the staff that you want. You can structure it how you want if you can try, I guess. Yeah,
you're at the mercy of some of those factors, I guess, outside of your control to a degree, depending on what limiting factors there might be, like the people that you have to work with if it's a small market, that you're talking about the other people that you're engaged with for expansion, for example. But yeah, you're talking about essentially culture. Good or bad people in a workplace can make or break it. So you're talking about the ability to be able to control that, as well as the direction, and see real impact, or be in control of the impact that you want to see taking place. Is that fair to say?
No, exactly. Yeah, culture's a word that's probably fluffed up a lot, but I can wholeheartedly say it's a massively important thing in your business. And we've had to fire people based that they weren't a cultural fit. They did their job well and they did a lot of things, but they weren't a cultural fit. And in the long term, if you don't foster your culture, your business just won't look like you want it in the future. Like, say, I think culture's a massive thing. And you can see people often get weeded out if they don't fit, but they can go under the radar. When you get super busy, like we did, and we just needed people to work, we let things go on far too long. Like people just pushing the boundaries a lot more than you'd expect, and all right, just off you go, just keep doing it. But then in the end, it just comes to a head. So everything always generally comes to a head. It's just how long it takes, especially with culture's a massive part of that.
So you're faced with some pretty difficult decisions, I guess. Normally in a management context, if you're working for someone, you'd probably have those conversations, or if you're HR, in an HR role, you have those kind of considerations. Then you have to have the difficult conversations, but it's not a skill set that you had automatically, so you had to develop those pretty quickly.
No. And being a small business, Beam at its peak as well only had, without our subcontracts, about 14 people. So it wasn't a big business. Like our Christmas shows had about 65 people there, that was the most humbling thing. Sorry, I get a bit choked up about it. It was such a great part of it. The Christmas shows, mid-year shows, where everyone come together and you just got to bathe in the success of like all these fantastic people. So it was just so cool, like with that. But yeah, definitely, yeah. I'm almost forgetting what you asked me now, but I'm taking myself back to dealing with HR issues, and I've blanked it out actually, because HR is, when you're a tech person and you just want to get stuff done, and then it's that is just not something you want to deal with. And I don't know anyone who's in business, if it's not something you want to deal with, just put it off to the side. But you can't really do that. So we obviously got advice from groups like the Small Business Commission and stuff like that, where we could sort advice, accountants and stuff like that, to help us with things. It's very tricky to know if you're paying people right or if you're giving them the right entitlements. Like all of these things are really hard to know when you're a small operator. You can't be expected to know everything, but as a director, you're liable for it. So it's your responsibility. But yeah, we had some really hard conversations like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ones that they ruin people's lives. And that's just what they do. So, yeah.
I might take a turn in topic and look at this. I see that there's a few different types of businesses. Can you talk about the opportunity for scalability or the shortfalls of those in terms of being able to grow a business when you look at these?
All right. And this is where I have to actually think about stuff, because this probably doesn't come out as easy, but I think there's a bit of traditional, is the word there. It's commonplace that you're either a service business or you're a product business, or you can be a mixture of both, but the lines are blurred a lot between the two now. I really feel if it's a product or a service, or if it's a service as a product. I think when you think about a service generally involves more people. And that's the first thing that I think of when you talk about a service business. It's generally people are involved, unless you've automated it, which probably comes under the tech part more. So service business is a hard business, and that's what Kodo Tech is an IT business. It's not really a product business, it's a full service business, whereas Swoop was more product business as a service sort of thing in a way, or the other way around. I don't know all the fancy stuff, I just do stuff. So definitely they're two very different cats, but you often have products that are sort of, if a service business, you're going to sell products, but they're not the primary focus and driver of the business. They're just spin-offs that you bring in, but they're complementary generally always. That sort of giving you a bit of... Yeah.
So traditional services as well, like other examples of those, I see are probably, the accountant, the law firms, that kind of thing, that probably do successfully well and have scaled globally. But the scalable aspect of it, and when I say scalable, I'm talking about just growth of the business, the ability for it to be able to multiply its capability, is limited by resources, you said before, human resources. So you can only have so many hours in a day, so many people that can perform that, and if you don't find the right people, or you can't, don't have the ability to go beyond those hours, then you're kind of limited by that in terms of earning capacity. Is that fair?
Yep. I agree wholeheartedly. And it comes down to a product. Sort of business can be a modular. It's modular, you have one, then you have two, then you have three, then you have four, and you can just rinse and repeat. And modularity gets scale easily, and it's tried and proven. And generally, modularity and products can be done with the same people. You might have to have a few more to look after that sort of product set to keep working, but generally, from our internet business, once the tower's built, then it's just business as usual, connecting customers. We don't have to go back and build the same tower every week or anything like that. So it's very much a hands-off, and that gets to a point of where you can be very lean. And definitely in Beam Internet world, we were very lean, basically had two people looking after the entire thing, which wasn't ideal. We had one person doing call centre, you call it, but Becky was amazing. She looked after nearly 4,500 customers, and the industry average is one call centre staff per 500 customers. So you can, when you take it out and you go, how do you do that? It's just you build things well that you know will do well to keep online. You build it in the best intentions to do what you want it to do. And if you do those things, we just found that there was very little maintenance and very little upgrades. We gave the customers the tools to do as much themselves, and then she was just awesome. So any little things that came through, like some days the phone did not even ring, like for help calls. Like we went, I think 3 days the year that we sold with the phone not even ringing for a support call, which is just out of control. Like, so.
It's a good thing.
Yeah,
I expect.
It's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
but so that's what you can do if you do a product business. Well, yeah, it can
grow,
exponentially, and that's what happened. It exponentially grew way too quick for us to handle, and yeah, it was a big struggle. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Lifestyle or exit strategy, can you explain the difference between these two?
I'm not probably placed to talk about these two things.
Well, you've exited, and you've got one that delivers a lifestyle.
Yes. So they talk about when you start a business, you should think about how you want it to look, you know, your exit strategy or whatever. And of course, we did not think like that, and we did not do that. So probably at our detriment, but it wasn't thought of at the time. It was just we needed to get on with this and get it done, and let's just get moving, and that's what we did. But I think Kodo now is a lifestyle business. We've worked ourselves out of it from a day-to-day operation that pretty much we're involved for a point that we love being involved with it. It's just a good thing that's doing great things with good people, and it's just doing its thing. We get rewarded for our input into it, and it's fantastic. On the flip side of that, exit strategy came probably from Beam Internet lots of things started coming with that. We did not plan that even 6 months before it happened. Like, quite honestly, it was a last minute thing, and it was a stars aligning thing actually. We tried hiring people to help, especially myself, to get out of the trenches. That just was not easy. To get someone that's on call, that's quite technical capable, we were even offering $180,000 to $200,000, and we could not employ someone. And we tried for 6 months on end, and it was a point of, this is a warning sign, I can't get out. We felt trapped, and that was a point where we're like, we have to get out of this. And people probably don't know this, but we got trapped, and then pretty much we were like, and then everyone knows Starlink obviously started launching, and then Boeing started launching satellites, and then the NBN's policy changed quite a lot. A lot of these things started coming. Telstra won some, I could go into telecommunication issues a bit, but they, being a conglomerate, the government, anyway, we basically got underdogged quite a lot with availability of spectrum, availability of funding and resources, to the point in the end the NBN started charging us a fee every month to provide internet to customers that aren't on the NBN's network, to recompensate their poor network. So all of these things started coming together, and we're like, oh. And then it was actually from a LinkedIn post that I did, which I didn't do a lot, but I did one that got the interest of someone at Swoop, and then we started talking to Swoop, and they were basically looking at the time to acquire businesses, and this was in the middle of COVID, and we got acquired within about 3 months of quite a due diligence, thorough process. It went really quickly, and we never met any one of them during COVID, so we never met anyone that I worked for or who bought our business. So if that's an exit strategy for you, I don't know, but we got out, and very thankful for it in the end. There's things that I miss, and your business isn't what it was before, but it's just unfortunately.
So you're running a new startup now that's a bit ag tech focused and is obviously driven from a passion of yours. What's your approach to that one with respect to lifestyle or exit strategy? Have you thought about that with this one, or are you just, again, going boots and all, thinking, I think there's an opportunity here and I'm into this, so I'm just going to give it a crack and see what happens?
It's so, like, I've done a lot of I know where things need to be done. And talking to people like Graham here is definitely in RDAs and things, and people and customers, I definitely have a good feeling, and tried with a few people of what needs to be done. There's a need, definitely. I think at the moment though, coming from being through getting flogged out in the business, I don't really want to go and get flogged out in the business again. I've aged a lot from this process, and I guess we got a payout from us selling our business, which has helped get, I suppose, established a bit, which is, it doesn't pay for us to live, but it's taken the pressure off from having to really, go and make something work. So this business now, and hopefully probably many other businesses or partnerships, will be either social enterprise style, or they'll be much more of a lifestyle with a give back, I feel. The only reason I would have an exit strategy from one of them is if I firmly felt that I or whoever was at the limit of their capabilities, and they needed more capability from a larger business or a different business to partner with that could actually bolster or bring that to it. So that's where my head's at the moment. I don't have any plans on exiting unless I feel it's conducive to...
Necessary.
Yeah, necessary to aid. So, yeah.
So we'll go these, we've touched on some of these already, obviously, but these are kind of identified simple steps, to consider when you're looking at a startup. Ideation part is really looking at, when we did talk about this part, what's the underlying bit that makes you think this is something I should start as a business? And you talked about need. The need and the why were the two factors there. Yeah. MVP is an acronym for minimum viable product, used a lot in the startup world, which essentially, if we take the example of the Beam Internet, was your first 2 towers, really, wasn't it? That 35,000 was, you thought, how can we get this done as cheaply and as quickly as possible? It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. It just needs to be able to be functional enough and test, see if we can get people buying it. Yeah. Yeah,
probably it wasn't even. We actually built that with the best knowledge that we had at the time and the best. I don't know what you call it. Like, we built it like we didn't funnily enough, from a tower we built at the start was sort of to one we built at the end took us probably about 3 times as long actually to build later on in the piece, because we had so many learnings we learnt from doing our other process, and that came from cockatoos in some areas eating certain types of cables and causing things to go offline, and lightning strikes wiping out entire towers, and certain seasonal aspects and exacerbating lightning issues in areas, So we spent so much effort in the end trying to reduce outages and reduce call-outs, which brought that. But yeah, those 2 things, but probably the product really is the actual internet connection you're selling to someone themselves. So it was like we had $49 to $89 or even $109, I think, for like a high end, and that was testing those products at that speed and that plan, data usage, a good fit in that price range. We were a little bit more expensive than other providers, but only like 10% or something generally like that we felt that was justified for what we were giving on top of someone else. So it was validating that those plans were actually going to work, and that was pretty much once we started selling it, and then we just had to keep up with selling it. And it didn't change a huge amount over the course of the business either, those plans.
So you mentioned you had this pricing strategy of a little bit more expensive than the others. How do you go pricing? I mean, you had some competitors, NBN were already trying to sell high-speed internet. How did you go thinking, yep, I'm going to bump this price a little bit and I think people will pay for it? What was your thinking? How do you pick a price and go, yep, we'll see if this works?
You want me to give you that there's actually an answer to that?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. I think we had to look at what it cost us to run, and then we had some targets, obviously, on what we needed to get 300 connections, because the margin in that was enough to sustain the operations and outgoing. So that was our first breakpoint target. If we didn't hit 300 with this mix of plans, we might as well shut up shop. Like, so they were key triggers, and you've got to have key triggers built into your products that you're selling. If you don't have a target to sell X amount, then how do you know what revenue you've got coming in to sustain you actually conducting your business? So, and Kodo's no different to that. There's obviously managed customers have a monthly fee they pay, then they get discounts on things, but we rely on them spending X amount of time with us as well to then compensate. So there's always metrics around how the things bolt together, and the internet stuff was that, all right, now we're going to 1,000 customers and we're expanding. What do we then need margin-wise to continue to operate? And luckily, as we grew, the margin got bigger, not smaller. So that was where we got lucky. And then the industry kept putting their prices up and we just left them at the same. So after about 3 years, we were pretty much the same or cheaper, but that's sort of where it ended up. But it was really working backwards from where you need to get to. That was a big thing for us. Like, I think, and I'd say that to anyone, that if you're trying to figure something out, you need to think of what you need to survive or get what you need, and then price your point back. And once you've priced back, are you then competitive to what's around, or can you justify why you are out of that price range? Like, and that's the thing. If you justify, people will generally pay.
Yeah.
If they believe that it's worthwhile, they will generally pay. No, first customers were early adopter advocates, and luckily we had a lot of annoyed people in the area, and we had business customers through Kodo. So we immediately, with Beam, we advertised to Kodo, hey, we're doing internet now, and straight away we had, I think, 80 or 90 signed up before we even built our first tower.
Wow.
So that tested sort of put our feet in the water, and we got good response from that. So, and that just came from a synergy from one business to another, which we knew was likely to happen. Another business that we did have in between here was a business called Hypertech, which Simon worked in for many years on doing residential computer stuff. So we, sort of a community-based thing. Kodo is business only, and the place a lot of people go wrong when they start an IT company, we felt, big thing I overmissed actually, is that you start doing everything. I'll do home computers, I'll do business computers and all of this. And then when you get bigger, you go, oh, I can't do home computers anymore because they don't fit the mold. Like I was saying, spitting stuff out, that's sort of what happens. So we decided a little bit later that we had all of these business customers, but they have home computers, but we don't want to service them because our techs, our pay rate, our structure and our systems don't fit home computer work. So we started another business on the side just to focus on home computers in the same place, the same building, and they referred between the two. So then we had that avenue. That business is merged into Kodo now. The name is still separate, but it's functionally operates under the one business today. But they have distinctly different purposes for a distinctly different market. So
what was it like getting your first customer for Kodo? You know, you three had branched out. You stepped away from another business that you were working with. So you had a comfortable salary. You stepped away. We're going to focus on small business. It's easy enough to find them if you've got, access to, or maybe didn't have access to internet necessarily, which is why Beam started. But, you got Yellow Pages, worst case example, or run down the main street. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember and this is what happened, luckily, disclaimer, when we worked for the other company, obviously they'd got rid of probably, in our fortune, probably nearly 100 and something customers, which we'd worked with and built good relationships with. And when we went outside, we then approached probably about 20 of those, and they were some of our foundation customers pretty much. That it grew from that. Today, not many of those are customers still, just because they were further away and niche-y and they didn't fit our bill in the end, but we provided service for them for probably 4 or 5 years. It worked mutually. So we basically had an agreement. They were ringing us when we were still working. They're going like, far out, how did this happen? And then if we left, would you do this? Pretty much. So, and that's what occurred there.
But you also said it was important to know who not to go after as well, and make that really clear. That was always from the beginning? Easy to get run away with and be all things to all people. You
can run away, and that's probably a big learning that I've seen, and it's something you've got to be very controlled and diligent about, because running away, distractions, lack of focus on what you're actually there to do or what you were originally set out to do can not end well. You'll probably still get somewhere, but I would say if you focused on what you're actually initially trying to do instead of doing 20 things, you're going to have a better outcome. And how do you measure yourself on that when you're changing? I'm not saying change is good. We changed frequently doing stuff, but it had calculated change to it, and we knew we had to change. And it wasn't like we came up one day, let's do this. It was like one day and then maybe the day later we would do it. It was always a thing with us. That's pretty radical. Let's sleep on it. And then the next day you'd make a decision about it. So it wasn't like we waited weeks or months, but lots of changes happen. But focusing on what you're there to do, setting some goals, and then if you're not meeting those goals, really you need to reflect and go, what's going on here, and go back to that.
So there's an understandable sort of connection with a business idea that you have. I see, this from time to time when people will have an idea for a business and they spend time and energy on trying to develop this idea, and there's an emotive sort of connection to it, I guess, that you want to hold on to it or you want to make it work. How do you balance that with truth testing, or what did you do to truth test to go, no, that's a bad idea actually, and we shouldn't proceed down that road? Did you ever have those?
Just don't have bad ideas.
That's the easy way.
But
for an ideation, someone coming up with an idea for a business, how do they go through
Heck, and I'm probably right now going through this phase of so many things to do out there and so many ideas, and you start dabbling, but it's actually getting your feet and getting stuck into it, which is not an easy thing. I think, and this is, things fall into place a little bit, but you just got to look at what your core strengths are. And I'm trying to do that right now with these other things. What can I do effectively now? What can I do with my experience, and is it doing what I want to achieve in the long term, I guess? Not if it's making any sense, but it's sort of,
So between you and Josh, did you ever say, no, we've had this idea, but one of you says, no, let's not do it, and you go down that path?
Yep.
Okay. So who did that, or have you got an example of one of those discussions?
It's the mum and dad discussions we were talking about earlier, who's mum and who's dad. We're very different personalities. Anyone who knows Josh in here would know he's the quite outgoing, boisterous, quite confident to a point, but he's the big thinker kind of guy. And then I'm more of the stable head reserve kind of guy. And we had a really good relationship and meeting in the middle. His brainchild is coming up with newspaper things, although he doesn't like marketing, but he just thinks outside of the square something shockingly, and generally we rein it in the middle somewhere. So we often had things I would go oh, we should do this. Probably more so he came up with stuff I was like, what in the absolute heck are you on about, dude? But very rarely it was stuff that was actually a bad idea. It just wasn't the right place and time. And the right place and time was that we just didn't have the resources or structure. There's so many things we could have done on top of this, but it just wasn't practical. So yeah, definitely a lot of things that come up that you need to decide on. And yeah, ideas and direction change are always going to occur in a business, I think. And
so how do you test your when testing your idea, because now you're doing some things on your own to a degree, and you have worked with Josh. So I'm picking up that there's strength in being able to bounce an idea off someone that's complementary, I guess, in skill set, to be able to work out whether or not that's a pathway forward. When you do it yourself.
Yeah. It's one thing I've learnt the most over probably the last 3 months is, although it was a pain in the ass working with Josh and our relationship at times, we were the best thing for each other in this life. And we're good mates, we're still obviously really good friends, and we still work in Kodo and all this, but at the time it got very difficult, being friends and being business partners when you're under the slammer pretty much. So it got really difficult, but we made it through. I think now I've realised that not having a sounding board to bounce things off, I actually miss that a lot. You can't achieve as much on your own as you can with a group of like-minded people. And I've really learned that lately, that it's really hard to ground yourself and to find a direction without some kind of sounding board. And if that's my poor wife at times, but she's sort of like, oh, no, okay, dear, but like you really do need someone who can hold you accountable as well, I think, and all of those things you struggle on your own. Like I'm a pretty motivated person, but everyone struggles with life at times, or, you know, to get out of bed, you've got to feel driven and you've got to feel like you've got success. And in a startup phase, that can be really hard, and with a group of people, but on your own, even harder. Like to self-motivate and to keep going when it gets hard, I don't know if I want to have done that. I don't think I could not have done this without the both of us. Like no crimes in the world. Like, but there's so many things in there you need someone for.
So I've also noticed, you know, from time to time there'll be people with ideas for startups or ideas in business, and some people are quite cagey about their idea because they think someone's going to take it. You know, it's a new idea for a business. I don't want to put it out there and someone else take my idea. So at what point do you consider cagey to be a good thing, and when is it not a good thing? Is that a fair question?
I'll answer this as nice as I can. There's no room for caginess in the world. I don't think there's any room for caginess, especially in Australia. Especially if we're trying to innovate and grow and bring new things in. Like, we used to think like this, like hide your idea from people and don't tell them, but in the end, you look at all the great people that have achieved things, they generally aren't worried about it. You look at an iPhone or something, for example, like you're like, oh, why would they release an iPhone? It's because they're already working on the next iPhone that you're trying to copy the last one. You're like, the people who are founders are always one step ahead mentally of what they're trying to do, and that's your strength. Like, so if you're worried about the IP and your thoughts you've got now, by the time someone else cottons onto it or copies it, you should already be on to the next evolution. It's not applicable to every business, but I honestly feel that there's a time and a place where think of open source software. For anyone who knows it, it's sharing it. I'm not saying share everything, but it's a sharing that then you actually benefit from that sharing. Like if no one else had done what you were trying to do, which is probably largely impossible now in the world, with there's stuff going on everywhere, you just don't know about it. It's really just figuring out what's the time, but are you comfortable, and is your idea really that special? Like, and it sounds blunt, but it's probably really not that special, in the scheme of things, and it's just trust yourself that you can actually run with this and you know your idea better than anyone else, and get on with it, so.
And there's always going to be other people that are doing what you're doing. So with both of the examples that you've come up with in terms of businesses that you've had with Kodo Technologies, it's an IT services company that services businesses. It's not a novel idea necessarily. It was just that you had a particular market that you were focused on and saw that gap there. Beam Internet, probably a bit of an early mover, I'd say in the grand context, but you weren't necessarily the first people with that idea and still went out there.
Yeah.
It was critical to get out and communicate with your businesses that you were talking to.
Well, and this is probably a good example of this, that when we started Beam, we didn't really know if anyone heard of NewScope that was operating in Adelaide, similar to Unity. They were the same sort of business as ours, but in the metro Adelaide. One of the first things that we did when we started Beam was actually go and introduce ourselves to NewScope, and we said, we don't want to be competitors. There's no room in this market to be enemies and competitors in this. Can we work together? And in that point, we then decided this is a very vague delineation of our boundary, and Gawler sort of through a fringe was that on the Adelaide Hills. We decided that we'd run our technologies on the same synchronisation protocol, so when we point our antennas at each other, we can use the same spectrum. We decided that we would resell each other's services where applicable, so we did that literally within the first couple of months of starting. And they had ambitions to build where we were building, but we managed to come to an amicable agreement for both parties, and that continued to the end when they actually sold out before we did.
From time to time, I've seen businesses that have come to us and said, I'm looking to do this business, and I say, okay, well, what's your target market? And they go, I don't know, Barossa or Gawler, if they're in Gawler. And they're not always, in fact, very rarely do I find people thinking, I can go bigger than this. I mean, initially I'll just go for Barossa or Gawler, but, you know, there's a bigger market out there and this can go bigger. So why not think Australia, or why not think internationally as a long-term goal? Merits? Or how, you know, what point did you come up with this, or think that bigger than Barossa was important for you?
Growth. I think like at one point it was like, going now, we've just got to keep going. No, it was literally like the business was getting structured in a way that it was happening, and we were getting so much demand from the rest of the state without even advertising. So from a Beam point of view, it was just the growth thing that kept popping up, and it was like, people need internet there. Oh, right, well, we better do something about it. You know, so that happened. With Kodo, we really haven't. We do have customers interstate. We do have customers in Adelaide, but that's not our primary intendance. Our primary audience is regional, small, medium business, and we don't turn someone away, but it will be pretty quickly found out if they're not a fit, they won't blend. One of the best things we have at Kodo is if you're in that local area, or in the same with Beam, you can send someone out there. Someone, you know, worst thing in IT is when you're trying to help someone on the phone to plug their printer in. You say, I'll get in the car and I'll be there in 5 minutes. You know, it's hard to beat that, and that's something we really tried to keep going. It's harder as you get bigger, but definitely being local, there's less obstacles to, you know, I suppose, degrade your service. But when you start a business, like, there's no reason why when you register a domain name, if you can register the domain name .com as well, so you've got at least some traction overseas, or you can look into trademarks and patents, you can look into LLC names overseas if you want. We're going to talk about accountants hopefully in a minute, because that's a big thing that we had some learnings from. There's lots of things you can think about. Hey, if this did actually get there, like, what do I need to be prepared for? Like, and there's probably just a few things at the startup that you can think about that, but I don't know. We never started it thinking. We started with the name Beam Barossa, for example. Like, we were very narrow-minded in our thought there, and then we had to adapt with it. We didn't have to, but we did. So. Yeah.
Okay, so we just talked about we touched on the accountant side of things, and part of this is being self-aware in terms of what your capability is and isn't, I'm guessing, from that. And also, I've seen a thread of working with people, be it customers, you talked about fit, and also with people that you wanted as part of, you know, working within your business. And you also mentioned about the other ISP provider that was looking to do Adelaide that you partnered with. What do you look for when you're looking to engage with people in business or in, you know, in staff, and in terms of self-awareness? Which parts, or what did you think? Yeah, I might break that. I might just focus on the first question.
A few questions.
Yeah. Let's just go with the culture fit one side of things, I guess, from a business to business and staff side of things. Yeah.
Business to business, obviously, it's pretty hard if there's no mutual benefit to start with, I guess. There's got to be some mutual benefit for both parties. There's got to be generally some synergies and things, you know, some common understanding of what you're doing and trying to achieve. The other thing that I'm a bit judgmental on is handshake. We often go and meet people if they don't shake my hand very well. I often start to, you know, you just look for other things in people. So there's a lot of social cues that Josh and I definitely pick up on, and we often come back and we said, that was strange, like, or that was, you know, and we're thinking exactly the same thing. So we could judge people's character fairly well, and that was a big thing that made us comfortable or uncomfortable with the decision. And we went through quite a few times of looking at merging with other businesses over the last few years, and we pulled out on every one of them based on the culture, just something's not right feel. Everything looked awesome, but it just was not, there was just something in the back of our head that was going, it's just not quite right. So you got to trust your gut instinct, unfortunately, with some of these things. And most people have a pretty good person radar. I'd hope that are doing things. So let's
despite it looking good as an opportunity, it's thinking about whether or not is this person a good person to do business with?
Yeah, and their past is a big thing. If you can find if you've got common ground or common past and that, like the ISP guys, they'd started up out of their garage as well. They'd, put all their life savings into it. They'd gone through heartaches that we'd gone through, so there was good sort of understanding there, which was straight away easy to, come to understand. Yeah. So finding similarities and things with other businesses isn't always a bad thing. So
I've got a point here. I know we were talking about being self-aware and what services to reach out for, but competitors, how many is too many or not enough, or is there a just right or not?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading a book the other day called, pretty sure it's How Big Things Get Done. It's a bit of an interesting one. If anyone's read it or not, it's pretty cool. And the guy was going in there about being a first, adopter or an early adopter of a business product or service. And it's often not, you think it's the best thing to be the first one off, but it's actually probably not a great thing because you've got no learnings from anyone else to bounce off of. So I think from that, you don't want too many competitors. If there's people that are well established, they've got a clear edge over you and you've got nothing to value add on top of that, you're probably going to be fighting a pretty hard battle to get anywhere. But if you've got competitors that you can see weaknesses in them, like obviously IT was local support that we picked up the phone quickly, we got on site quickly, we gave solutions that were priced at what we knew our customer wanted. A lot of other people were coming in because they have big customers selling like $30,000 for a new server, and it's like you just need like a simple network storage device, so they were sort of picking up on those things with that. The internet was clearly that customer service was our advantage over our competitors and reliance. So we basically were like, if there's no one in our area doing that, there could be 5 million of those around us, but if there's no one right in our area, if there's someone in our area and they were doing a good job, why would you put yourself through that? Not to turn anyone off of a good idea, but it's a much harder thing, and it's like doing, I suppose, pioneering an idea that hasn't been tested yet. People need to do it, and that's like where I'm, sort of want to go next to a point, is like you need to pioneer, but there's a lot more risk in it, there's a lot more heartache in it, there's a lot of all of those things that compared to something that people have already done a bit of groundwork on is a totally different game, but they're fun. Like if you can get it right, yeah.
So I mentioned very briefly before being self-aware and knowing what sort of services to bring in, and you mentioned an accountant was pretty key, and we were talking about cost structures before, so I don't know what expertise you have in that space, but what services did you engage in at that early stage to try and help you feel, yep, I'm confident I've got the right advice to move forward? Yeah,
I'm trying to think now. Probably main one definitely is an accountant, and I can tell you to find the right fit accountant at the start, but unfortunately you're probably going to struggle when you grow. If you can find an accountant that you think's going to go where you want to go, and they've got a good skill set which is experienced. The problem we had was we found an accountant which fit us at the scale and size that we were, and then when we got a lot bigger, got a little bit out of their scope of realm, and it's very hard to then go, oh, it's getting a bit bad, we need to really change. So finding that is hard. Just vet the accountancy a lot, because the business structure that you get set up is really important going forward. Like we had issues with ours in the end, had issues from accountancy advice that nearly made us go broke several times. And so I've got many stories if anyone wants to hear about it, but there's just things that you trust advice. So if you can get referred advice, especially, and our advice was referred as well from many people, but just try and really vet those accountancy skills that are going to help you get a structure and give you advice, because the accountant will give you more advice than just, it's a proprietary limited and you've got 50-50 shares and like this and that. They will generally give you sort of advice on, I suppose, a little bit of strategy sometimes, a little bit of ownership in that real early phase when you're not sure what's going on. We were talking about it earlier, we looked at getting people in all the time, we were doubting ourselves And we're like, oh, maybe we should bring someone in on an advisory board. Maybe we should bring this sort of person in. Maybe we should bring that. And in the end, it was like, just get on with it kind of thing. And no one was the right fit. If someone was the right fit, I think we could have. But you just got to trust yourself with that. So accountancy is a big one. We obviously had a lot of tech skills in-house, which was really helpful. Tech skills otherwise is one you will need to get. Reliable email, I know it doesn't sound like much, but reliable email, and if you've got web presence, definitely is a big thing. Obviously phones, if you're doing any of that. Social media marketing is, for some businesses, a huge part, and that's, when we started, it wasn't so hard, but now with like SEO marketing and AdWords, and there's a lot of trickery around marketing now that you really do need some expertise advice in really getting your bang for buck.
So SEO, excuse me if everyone knows, but SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. Effectively is looking at positioning your website as highly as possible when someone Googles a term that hopefully you want them to relate to your business. So regardless of the search term they're putting in, if you think that relates to your business, the idea is that your business comes up on first, below the sponsorship, and the Google AdWords, or the AdWords bit that you talked about was Google AdWords, where you pay Google for advertisement when people are doing searches so that your business comes up every time as well. So it's about that prominence, I guess, in terms of people seeing you there. And you talked about, you've done the leader side of things, and there's some... Digitally
is a big part of marketing and advertisement, but it's only one part of it. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, quickly, we found that 3 points of contact was, I think, a minimum that you need, and 3 points of contact's like this paper.
That's pretty good.
Paper stuck on the fridge. 2 years later, then there's a flyer and then a word of mouth referral. The third thing normally, and a need as well. And then,
So you're talking about, this is the number of times that people need to see your business or see your advertisement or hear about it before they take action on what it is that you want them to do, right? So to buy or to book a table order, if you're a restaurant or whatever it is that you're selling essentially.
Yeah.
They talk about an average being 8, I think, 7 or 8 point times that people need to see your business before they're prepared to engage your business for whatever it is that you're selling, pending there's that need.
Yeah, and it's got to be a call to action.
Yeah. Right.
Often we found as well, in the early adopters are there, but then you've got a call to action is you've got the fence sitters, you just need to get them over the line, and that call to action is what we found very effective, is like $5 off for 6 months, or we'll give you this for free, or if you sign up now, no setup fee. So a lot of people hang there, they just need to be pulled over, and call to action is something that's really effective for that, and it worked forever and it still works now, and everyone uses it. Yeah. Black Friday sale, it's no different. People are like, oh, it's a great thing, but really it's just a sale that they're getting because they're calling you to a discounted product line, so there's definitely that. The audience is a big thing with your business as well, of who is your target audience. We sort of analysed in the internet side, who's the person in the household who changes the internet provider, who's the one who signs up, who's the one who uses it the most. And in the end, we started targeting our Facebook and our YouTube to females 25 to 45. And then we sort of learnt that over time that we target our wording as well to those things. So we start to figure out who's actually the change doers or change makers, I don't know what you'd say. And how do we target them? When do we target them? What's the time these ads go out? When are they home? Are they doing, kids are watching TV, or are they cooking, or, so all of these things that got to align. You've got to understand who the target audience is to effectively make a strategy to target them.
So this kind of activity, I guess, is the it's branding, effectively marketing, brand strategy and execution, but it comes back to essentially trying to minimise your return on ad spend, right? So the amount of money that you spend per advertisement generates you X number of customers, and the more times you do this, Beam would have had monthly number of customers that they're paying bills each month, number of customers or new customers that you've got related to the amount of money that you spend on an ad tells you how much that customer will cost you to acquire. Yeah, and so all this brand strategy or marketing strategy in terms of understanding who your market is and how you're going to speak to them specifically about coming on board with your business helps to reduce that cost to bring them on board.
And you've got to then put it back to you're only selling so much product, and then like in our product, we basically go, what's the acquisition value of a subscriber? And you've basically got to go, if I spend this much on advertising, do I still make money over a 2 or a 3 year period? So at peak, we spent nearly $450 odd acquiring each customer, which was a bit. Peak, we spent, I reckon, on digital advertising alone, nearly $40,000 a month to capture what we did. And like that would get us probably 800 customers sometimes, or it might only get us 100 customers a month. So really big variances, but that cost that we spent on advertising was the same we spent on paying wages and equipment and installation. So it doubled our return time, basically.
Did you go on Triple B at all? Did that help at all?
I think we did ads on there and Hot Country, yeah.
I was wondering if there's an audience there still.
We tried radio and Flow FM. That was probably a more big one when we were pushing into the northern areas. Yeah, we felt, what do people listen to in that area? What newspaper do they read? Even though they're owned by all the same people now, but it was very much, they're driving around their work ute, they're listening to what radio, then tapping, yeah, so, yep.
Does it have to be perfect? Do you have to have everything perfect to launch your business?
Definitely.
Everything has to be perfect?
No, I'm joking. Far from that. I think, I don't know, depends on how much risk you want to take. Far out, like that's, no. What's perfect? Like that's a simple question I'd put to you, like what does perfect look like and who's to judge what perfect is? Like, I think you're not immature or you're inexperienced when you start a business, so you're gauging yourself, I suppose, of what that looks like, and you'll judge yourself a few years later on what you thought was perfect, like, and it won't be the same thing that you thought then. So, no, you need certain things in place, which are like your structure of things. You need, obviously, your why. You need the support. You need, obviously, a plan on how you're just going to lightly do what you're trying to do. You don't need business plans are something that, I don't know, we never wrote a business plan at all. I shouldn't discourage people from doing these things. We never sought, we got, like, from a finance point of view, like we got bank finance, we never got external investors, so we never had to, I suppose, appease some of these things, because we were just like, if you want a business plan, you don't believe in our success and where we're going, like, and so we were a bit naive in that, but bank finance is much better than private investor finance from a lot of reasons. So there's those simple things, like you obviously need a presence, ideally, like, and if that's just email, there's no problems with that at all, but as long as it's working and reliable, like that's something that people, or you have a dodgy website, which I probably can't comment on too much on that at the moment, but either have a website or don't have a website. I think, these things that people can go and find you, and if they find something that's a bit half tattered, it's not a good image and a good representation on you at the start. That's just my opinion, but if I go and find a business and I go, man, that just looks dodgy, like one of the things probably with that, when we started Kodo, we're like, what phone number do we get? And we're like, we want to give an appearance that we know what we're doing, we've been around, reputable, so we got a 1300 number straight away, because immediately we've got an 8562 number, plays in people's heads immediately that actually, these guys have got 1300, they actually
are bigger than they are.
Yeah, they are bigger than they are, and when we put number plates in all our cars, we put numbers that were in the teens, although we only had like 6 cars, so people see them driving around. It's all an illusion thing. It's not lying, but it's an illusion, and I don't like people who do an illusion to do nothing with it, but if you're doing an illusion and you can back it up, I think, why not, so.
I came across a business, this is a bad example perhaps, or maybe a good example of exactly that. There was a business in Queensland who saw an opportunity to do an HR service. So they go to businesses and businesses weren't sure which HR company they should engage for hiring a particular staff member. And this guy thought that was a solution. So he developed a website and put it out there and had businesses contacting him. And the front end of the website looked fantastic, but there was no back end at all. It was meant to be that the website did all the functionality of searching and contacting the other HR companies and spit out a report. As soon as he got the information, the data through the front end, it was him picking up the phone, calling all the HR companies, doing all that work manually, and then spit out a professional looking report to put back to the companies so he was delivering what it was that he said was going to happen. It's just that the computer wasn't a system that he developed that was doing all the bells and whistles for him, and he hadn't developed that, although that's where he wanted to get to. But to push it out, he just put it out so it looked like it was that, and he was running around doing all the bits in the middle. So there's risk associated with that, but illustrates, I guess, that point. Yeah.
And you see a lot of, honestly, see a lot of it occurring, unfortunately. Like, I'm not sure. Just put yourself in your customer's shoes and go like, if I was looking at this, like, what would you think of it? You know, like, and if you're happy to buy or negotiate or whatever with that business, then I guess feel comfortable in that. But if you look at it and go, oh, it is a little bit unpolished. The other thing that's invaluable is peer-reviewed feedback or third-party feedback. So ask someone that you know that's not a good friend or anything and go, hey, how's this look or what do you think? You know, that you can trust, like, and get some actual, they'll give you critical feedback and that'll help you a lot. So we found third-party like peer review from outside people was a big help the whole way through, actually. I shouldn't understate that. Just having someone who can, you know, go, what do you think of this? And they go, like, screw their face up, you get a pretty good idea. So I had probably one person in my life who was like a sounding board like that on top of my wife, Kate. And then Josh had like one person as well that you just trusted that they would give you sound advice from a life experience, from what they've seen point of view. Yeah.
Not from a, I care about you and I want you to do well, so I'll give you
No, heck no, they couldn't care less.
No. So I think we've talked about these, you know, to a large degree, and how do you validate your business idea? If you're getting customers and people are pre-ordered, you talked about having gone out to customers before you even put up the first tower, and you know, from Kodo, existing customer base. You had people that were ready to sign up and you thought, yep, okay, well, that's validating it. There are people there willing to pay what we're prepared to offer as far as a price point for the service that we're prepared to put out there, yeah. So getting people who are not family and friends to validate, plus that peer support network that you just talked about, I think, as well.
Yeah. Is it working? You'll know.
You'll know, because people won't be buying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's, yeah, saying that, but then it's also how long do you give it before you sort of say it's definitely not working. And that I've heard horror stories in business of people just, they emotionally attach to the idea, like you said, and they just don't let it go. Like, and unfortunately, that's how you get bankrupt. You know, that's how bad things happen if you don't. You look at Gordon Ramsay cooking show, you know, like it's a bit of a thing, but those places are like borrowing money hand over fist to keep alive, and there's a lot of businesses that operate in the red that all it takes is just changing tax law, and then you're basically even further gone at some stage. Like you just can only live on that tittering balance of red and black for so long. Like otherwise you just won't sleep, and it's terrifying. So personally I found it terrifying of red figures more than a couple of months a year it's not good.
Not a good sign. I might move on from validation. I know this is going a bit past the idea of what it was that we were looking to bookend this with, which was the ideation through to MVP, test the market. We've talked about, so this is scale up or investor, you know, whether or not an investor is a good idea or not, and when do you have to think about scaling up. We've talked about copied already. I think we've covered scale up. People should be confident with that, it's just growth. When do you have to think about scaling up to the next level? I appreciate that for you it was probably demand driven, but that next step sort of stuff that you had to think about? Have you always just based it on demand?
Oh, yes and no, because obviously when you expand into a different area, essentially committing yourself to scaling up. So you've kind of come to a point where you're going, all right, we're doing this. So there's things that need to be in place for that, like say the southeast where we expanded to. So that's scale up. Like we sort of got to a point where we're growing locally, and we're still organically growing, but these people approached us from outside with problems, and then we're like, we should do something about it. So that was a separate sort of scale up. Those 3 areas were outside of our normal business. So that was obviously a big thing about a relationship with them in place, and we had to train them, we had to get systems to them, we had to get the way that who was responsible for what and where, when we'd deal with things. A lot of it initially was goodwill type arrangements, which over time, luckily, were all just, I suppose, like just good people that we trusted in each other, and we worked together for 6 years or 7 years, and it was good. But you don't always have that sort of experience. But we only put things really in writing probably about year 3 or something like that. So it's probably not a good example for some people, but we had enough control over things that we were comfortable with, and the other guys had enough control over what they needed to be comfortable with. So the risk was mitigated by a control and an outcome aspect. But then obviously we didn't need to hire a huge amount of staff for that. We really didn't have a huge amount of staff full stop, because they had their staff down there, which was great. Infrastructure, obviously, as we grew, then our core infrastructure got bigger. And then from an internet side of view, because that's probably the one that did scale the most, like the internet, like I said, comes from somewhere. You've got to feed it. And then as an internet provider, you don't just go and buy a Dodo connection and then sell that to 4,000 people. You actually have to go to the source. So we then started getting our own fibre optic cables to Victoria and Sydney, looked at America and Perth, and then we had stuff in data centres around the country to then pick up, like we were connected with Google directly and Netflix directly to pull traffic from them. So when it gets bigger, you have to have relationships with heaps more people. So that's obviously something that constantly was evolving. We needed more data centres, we needed more connectivity, we needed a lot of things, that all of that brought massive complexity as well, and that was a real struggle maintaining that and keeping that growth there. That actually was probably a really big challenge from that. Marketing in a different area, that's a big challenge as well. Just
different demographic.
Yeah, luckily these 3 guys had IT businesses in the area, so we did the flip of what we did at Kodo. Then we said, we've got internet now, do you want that? And that's how it worked in those 3 areas as well. So before we launched in Barossa area, I think we had nearly 140 lined up. We launched in Keith, we had 200 and something ready to go.
So the pre-sales, people were prepared to pay for it before you committed dollars to the infrastructure side of things. I think we touched on, I need an investor, and you in your experience, you went to bank finance initially to grow, and I guess the only other benefit that an investor can bring is the knowledge or skill set that you're lacking in your business. And you talked about that, I think, from an exit perspective. You guys had reached your capability limits. Capability limits in terms of being able to service the customers and feel like you were in control or driving a bit more of what was going on. So it became more of a need to get rid of, but it was a capability thing, right, to be able to exit at that point.
Yeah.
So capability and feedback or bounce off, as well as the funds, are the key considerations.
I think a lot of it's, you trust that they're more experienced, and they are experienced in an area that they can help you and or guide you through. I think it comes down to just not being confident, and you feel like you need a support network from someone who's got support. But I think you just got to consider with an investor that you are giving away a portion of your business for a service and something, but essentially forever. So you grow at an X times multiple, then you're still giving them away that percentage, which becomes a lot of money. And that's why people invest, obviously. So it takes two, but we found from the economic side of it, from an investor to get money, it was not worth it just from a money point of view versus bank loan novated lease, like with interest rates and that, it didn't seem plausible. If we were to do it, we would have got an external like board member as such in, or several of them that we looked at doing quite a few times. That's what we would have done to fill those skill gaps, but never money was ruled out. Once the bank kept loaning us money,
You had the ability to retain 100% equity. And
yeah, at least it's ours at the end, and we controlled the dividends that came out of it. And we had 100% say. And that's another thing, you give away ownership, you lose, obviously, depends on how they are structured in a directorship, but with two of us, if we bring in a third, there's a funny voting right issue that can come out of that, and then you invoke all sorts of tricky things that can cause problems. So, yeah.